online dean of the College of Arts and Sciences at Liberty University. He earned a Master of Arts and a PhD from the University of South Carolina. He earned those degrees in history. Dr. Roberts previously held positions at the University of South Carolina, the South Carolina Library, the papers of John C. Calhoun, Arkansas Tech University, and Yorktown University. His administrative experience includes positions in university assessment and accreditation, and he served as a department chair and associate dean. He currently serves on the board of the Abbeville Institute, a scholarly organization dedicated to studying the American South. His research interests include early American intellectual and economic history, and he's lectured and he's been published widely in the fields of the American founding, monetary and banking history, American intellectual life, and Southern literature. He has been a ruling elder in both the Presbyterian Church of America and the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roberts.
Well, thanks everybody. I appreciate the round of applause, and the fact that you worked in symmetry together is going to fit nicely in the algebra that we're going to be talking about here in a few moments. So, the first couple of lectures today are on algebra. This evening's lecture, making sure it occurs after supper when you're nice and sleepy, is going to be on calculus. So we'll look forward to that. I'm going to begin by showing a video as a bit of a disclaimer. This is from CNN, and it's about a series of commencement speakers that met an interesting reception to graduates back last May. And I think the color's a little bit wonky, but you'll be able to get the perception here.
Commencement speakers at multiple colleges are getting booed for bringing up a controversial topic.
AI.
Artificial intelligence. Because AI is going to touch everything else as well. Whatever path you choose.
AI is rewriting production as we sit here. I know it. Deal with it. Like I said, it's a tool.
Speakers were talking to a group of grads who were entering a daunting job market with widespread fear that many entry-level jobs will eventually be replaced by AI.
There is a fear in your generation that the future has already been written, that the machines are coming, that the jobs are evaporating, and that you are inheriting a mess that you did not create.
New research by Gallup shows that among Gen Z, excitement for AI has dropped, while anger and anxiety have gone up. About half believe the risks of AI outweigh its benefits in the workplace.
The rise of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution.
CNN has reached out to Schmidt, Borchetta, and Caulfield for comment.
And so, as you might have heard in that clip, these commencement speakers went and spoke to the best and the brightest American college graduates just a few weeks ago, and they were met with resounding opposition. People are fearful of artificial intelligence. They're worried about what the future is going to hold. They're concerned that artificial intelligence is going to reshape the American economy in such a way that it's going to perhaps make it impossible for people your age to get a good job, progress in that job, earn a living, so that when you follow this morning's speaker and actually get married to somebody, you may not be able to provide for them. So a great deal of uncertainty, a great deal of anxiety, and a great deal of fear. Now, as believers, we are called to be strong and courageous. We are called to know what's going on in the world around us so that we can meet challenges like this head on. It's not something that, as believers, we haven't encountered before in the history of the church, but the rate of the change and the kinds of concerns that it's raising is going to be a pretty important challenge for us. If you are like other Americans of your age. Now, I'm kind of looking around here. Now, this guy is not going to college this coming year. All right. So, but as I'm looking around to most of you, you're probably somewhere in the age group of 15 to maybe 20, 21, 22, maybe a little bit older than that. You're either in college, going to college, thinking about college, or like an increasing number of people your age, you may be deciding college is not going to be for you. And that... It's not part of the subject I'm talking about this week, but I've got advice for those of you who are not going. I've got a path for you. And AI is actually going to be pretty critical to it, but that's another, maybe next year. So what I want to do over a series of presentations to you, I want to give you the background of artificial intelligence. I want to teach you something important about human technology. I want to teach you where all of this stuff came from. Because by understanding where all of this stuff came from, I think it's going to demystify it a little bit for you. It might make you a little less fearful of what's going on, but it will also help you understand why really smart people are concerned about the direction in which artificial intelligence is going. Now, before I begin this, I do want to kind of do a little bit of a survey with you. How many of you have a smartphone? Okay, most of you. How many of you did not get a smartphone until you were 16 years old? Okay, quite a few of you. I think my kids probably did not get a smartphone until they were 16, 17. I don't know. My kids didn't even want to learn how to drive. I have no idea. But so for most of you, you're kind of in that age group and going through your teen years, probably without the early teen years without a smartphone, and that's really good. How many of you at home have a welding machine or a blowtorch? Quite a few of you. That's good. How many of you were using a blowtorch at the age of 12 or 13? Okay. You're either lying to me or you've got some really worrisome parents. Now, I could say the same thing about a shotgun. I'm sure if I asked how many of y'all have a shotgun in your house, everybody, yeah. I think I was probably somewhere around the age of 10, 11, or 12 when I got my first shotgun. I think it was about that age. But my parents were, unlike your parents, my parents were smart enough that they carefully trained me on how to use a gun. They did not just give me a shotgun and say, here, go after it. They did not give me a welding machine and a blowtorch and say, here you go. Kind of play around with it and see what it does for you. We did have a welding machine, so I can raise my hand. It's the same thing with the smartphone and with artificial intelligence. You have to be trained how to use these things and use these things effectively. And I've got a friend of mine who is now popularizing a point that he's making with a number of parents. You would not give your 12-year-old a blowtorch. You would not give your 15-year-old a blowtorch without training that person how to use the blowtorch. Same thing applies to a smartphone, artificial intelligence, that sort of thing. But before I begin, I got to ask one more question. How many of you have knowingly used an artificial intelligence model, an AI model? Keep your hands raised. I actually have to kind of look around on this one. All right. How many of you have used Microsoft Copilot as that model? Okay, I agree. How many of you have used Claude as the model? Okay, Anthropic's Claude. Gemini, Google's Gemini. Okay, how many of you use ChatGPT? Okay, all right. So here's another question. How many of you think you might have used an AI model, but you're really not sure? All right, that's important. Quite a few of you have raised your hands, and I appreciate that. I think others probably would raise their hand too, but that one they're a little bit scared to do so. But that is true, and that's typically a reflection of the way a lot of Americans do. The older you get, the less likely they are to have used it and known they have used it. So, folks, I'm not going to be talking to you today and tomorrow and telling you do not use artificial intelligence. That's not my goal. In fact, my goal is to teach you how to use it ethically and effectively so that you are going out into the world and glorifying the Lord in all that you do. And I'm here to tell you, all of these folks who are saying you've got to learn AI if you're going to be successful in the future, I'm sorry to say most of them are correct. And you'll understand that over the course of the next couple of days. All right, so let's talk about where all this stuff came from. This first presentation is really about the role of technology and what we think about technology as believers and as human beings and as Americans. And for those of you from Tennessee, Virginia, or the Carolinas, as Southerners as well. So, if we look in the book of Genesis, we have very early in the book of Genesis a reflection on technology. In Genesis chapter 4, we read, and Lamech took 2 wives. We don't do that anymore. The name of the one was Ada, and the name of the other Zillah. Ada bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all those who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. So what we have very early on in the 4th chapter of Genesis is an explanation of human innovation. Now, this is absolutely critical because it's probably the sermon that you have never heard. Seldom will a pastor or others dwell on these few verses because they seem to be rather obscure, right? How many of you have learned about these verses before? A few of you. How about keep your hands raised? I'm not done with you. If you are not a musician, keep your hand raised. All right, see how many folks took, right? If you're a musician, you've probably learned about the lyre and the pipe. Oh, right, see, chapter 4. Musicians, we're right there at the front and center in Genesis. But it's a little bit more than that, simply not just music. What they are doing is creating technology. And they are creating technology that dramatically expands what they are able to do as a simple, mere human being. And this is a fundamental lesson about the role of technology in our life, not only as a believer, but also as a human being. There are certain things that Jubal and Tubal-Cain and others were able to do that reflect the way in which we as human beings reflect one side of God's character. Being made in God's image is not simply that we are created with a soul. We are also created to be mindful, to be imaginative, to think, to learn, and unlike every other living creature, we are created to go beyond ourselves, to do things that we as a mere person can only think, but actually go beyond what we only think. So, this is kind of simple to see this in this passage. Jubal was probably walking around, and he was busy doing something, and to pass the time, what do you think Jubal started doing? Smacking rocks together. Not quite. We'll get the rocks here in a little bit. But he might have started smacking rocks together at first, actually. And as he's smacking those rocks together, what is he doing? Right? The same thing y'all did when you clapped when I came up on stage, right? You got in a rhythm, right? See that? Well, Jubal might have been a little bit like my son, my oldest son, and we always know my oldest son is content and happy because he's humming or he's whistling or he's somehow singing. In other words, he has a tune in his mind, and what Jubal was able to do was take that thing in his mind and perform it through an instrument. Other creatures don't do that. He took a figment and he turned it into something tangible. And in doing so, it dramatically expanded what he could do as a human being. In fact, I'm not going to dwell on this, but basically what we have here in Genesis chapter 4 is the first explanation of human culture. The relationships that produce culture are based on taking things in our mind and making them physical. And in doing so, we're able to create things like music, homes, houses. We're able to raise livestock, herd livestock, and do other things with animals, and ultimately make things with metal and other kinds of tools. Really important thing to understand. Now, let's jump ahead a couple of thousand years and think about how the story normally is told about the emergence of technology related to counting things. There's lots of technology that emerges a few thousand years BC that enable people to start counting things. Now, you may be thinking, why do we even have to learn how to count to begin with? Right? If I mention the word algebra, like I did earlier, I got booed. Right? Yeah, some people say, yeah, right. And I'm not going to mention that C word again. Calculus. One reason we start counting things is because we begin fulfilling the creation mandate of being fruitful and multiplying. And as we multiply, and I don't mean like having multiple wives, friends, right? But as we begin to multiply, we have to keep up with things. And once we realize we may have too much of one thing, we can start trading that one thing for somebody else's one thing that they had too much of. And as human beings begin to trade with each other, and trade becomes more sophisticated, we have to start counting. We have to start counting. And as we start counting, we have to begin building things that enable us to do that. And the abacus is one such example. Astrolabes are also an important example of this, and helps us to navigate, helps us to take longer journeys. I can kind of put it to you up here like this. So you can see here kind of a calendar of how these different things were invented over time. Folks, I'm going to be showing you a lot of slides in these presentations. I'm not going to necessarily be reading off these slides. You can kind of read along those things as well. So think of it as another way of engaging with this. You can listen to me, but you can also kind of read things as we go. So we have counting boards in Mesopotamia and Sumeria. These counting boards allowed people to begin trading different things with each other because you only have 10 fingers and 10 toes. Once human beings go beyond 20, maybe you can put your ears in there. I don't know, 22. You've got to come up with something else to do and use, and that's what some of these tools are doing. But note what is happening with this abacus, right? Note what's happening with the abacus. I am taking something in my mind and I'm giving it physical form. The way abacus, I don't know if it's abaci or abacus, right? Abacus is, the way these things would work is that each shell or stone would represent a number, like 5 or 10. So not only could I count things, I can also begin multiplying things. I can begin making greater and greater calculations. The abacus helps us do that, making pretty complex calculations. Egyptian calendars and other early calendars are also going to begin being developed, a couple of thousand years BC. And one of the things that these calendars allowed folks to do, well, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to play around here just for a second. What do you think those calendars enabled people like the Egyptians to do? Why did they need calendars? Keep track of harvesting time. Who said that? You can wave. Okay, good. I can't see you. All right. So keep track of harvesting times. That's great. Yes, sir. Keep track of when the Nile would flood, which would also play a role in the planting season and also harvest season. Yep. Hold festivals, right? When are you going to know when to party if you don't have a calendar? Right? You don't know when it's Friday night. So all of that is going to be important, and all of y'all are correct. And basically what you're saying is calendars allowed the Egyptians to make predictions. And they made those predictions with regularity. And once you start making predictions with regularity, then you can start planning things and planning things out. And you can create projects. And you can take all of these slaves that live in the Nile Valley and you can put them to work on projects building things like the pyramids. So you need that ability to calculate and predict in order to make those things work. But this step-by-step procedure that's written up here, that's really important. You need to put that away in your mind. Store that in your mind here for a few moments as we go through the remainder of the presentation. They are building step-by-step procedures, step-by-step rules to follow. And those step-by-step procedures and rules enable them to make calculations and predictions. There are also another thing that's able to be done in these new things that are being invented, this technology, is you're able to store memory. Now this is something that all ancient cultures quickly were able to do, and they stored memories in a lot of different ways. We think of stored memories in the ancient world as an oral tradition, telling stories, right? I'm a historian, tell stories, all I do for a living. So, but that's not the only way we store memories. These stones that people are counting were in effect a storage of memory, a storage of value, a storage of both indebtedness and what people have to pay. So being able to store things along with these step-by-step instructions is a kind of a fundamental thing. Now let me pause here just for a second, and I want to offer a bit of a corrective. We in 2026 use the word technology synonymously with the word tool. In fact, I'm apologizing beforehand. I'm going to do that, and it's a mistake, okay? You can give me more paper, those little clips or something. I don't know. So it is a mistake. But we use these two words the same. They don't mean the same. They shouldn't mean the same. A tool is something we assist with a particular task. So we might take two rocks and clap them together in order to create a rhythm, right? I can clap with my hands if I want to, but what's the advantage of using the rocks? It tends to be louder, and it makes a little different sound. That's a tool. Folks, any monkey can take a rock and crack a nut. That's a tool. Or crack another monkey. I mean, what? But that's a tool. We use it to assist with a task. Technology, though, is something else. Technology makes physical something that was once only in our minds. So, like Jubal, I can take this tune in my mind and play it in a lyre or a pipe. And that dramatically changes what I'm able to do with this thing that was just in my mind. Right? Right? Some of you are very musically inclined. I am not. I've got another son, very musically inclined, very good with languages. He taught himself multiple languages. He's fluent in a lot of languages. And he also can really play the piano and other instruments very well. What he has done is he's taken something in his mind and he's used this technology to do dramatically different things. In fact, the word tool and technology, they come from very different parts of the English language. Tool is actually from the Old English of toll, which I think was from the old Northern Germanic toa, and it simply meant what we would call today an implement. So if you think about a farm implement, a plow or a shovel, it's a tool that allows you to do certain things, but it does not dramatically change how you are thinking. It simply helps you better move dirt. Technology is from the Greek word techne, which is where we get technique and technician and other words related to that. And the Greek word techne was most associated with the word art. Okay? Art, craft. Something that was unique, something that was of a higher order of human beings. The monkey who's taken the rock to crack the nut, or the other monkey, is not producing art. He's not producing technology. All right, so think of it this way. What technology does, it takes figments of our minds and it makes them functional in new ways. It takes what is imaginative and makes it physical. And I'm going to repeat that because I really want that to sink in with you. So this is something that truly reflects the mind of God and really reflects God's character. What is the first thing we know about the Lord? What is the first thing we know He did? He created the world. How did He do that? How did He speak it? What did He say? Let there be. So we don't have a complete picture of this in Scripture, but it is possible to infer that in the mind of God there is an idea, and God then spoke that idea into physical creation. Everybody follow me on that? Right? Let there be light. And then what did He do? The earth was what? Without form. And what did He do? He created form, and then He separated what? Light from darkness and land from sea, right? Right? Water from land. He's creating. He's taking what is imagined and giving it physical form. Ladies and gentlemen, that is what technology does. That is the most important part of technology. Now, later today, something new is going to happen, and something new is going to happen for the first time in your lifetime or in your parents' lifetime that had not yet happened in human history. We'll get to that. That maybe will keep you awake tonight. Anyway, all righty. So, what does all this technology stuff mean? Well, the human mind alone is not capable of holding as much memory as we really need to build culture, relationships, trade, art, craft, and innovation. The human mind has limits in its capacity. And so what technology of those things that I just mentioned to you allowed was to store memory in some new and exciting ways. And we were able to expand that memory over time. We are able to go beyond what our individual mind alone is able to do. So, here is an important set of things to keep in mind. Number one, we know human beings through our limits. We know beauty through its limit. Right? Beauty is not unlimited. Beauty is limited in certain ways that create within itself an inherent sense of beauty. A beautiful piece of art is beautiful because it is limited to a canvas and certain strokes of a brush or certain lines of a pen, right? It's limited. A great artist is someone who has mastered the ability of limiting things in ways that we can see its beauty. Limits. We know human beings by their limits. Human innovation is caused by limits. Human innovation, boy, this is going to be really powerful at some point when you come to terms with this. You live in a culture that demands no limits. And it is a culture that is now grossly short on cultural innovation. We can't even make good Star Wars movies. Right? So, you got to know your limits. You got to know your limits as far as innovation. I've already gone over this multiple times. Making thoughts visible, making thoughts physical. This is an important part of human creativity. These devices that I've talked about, yes, they are tools. I'm using that word incorrectly. But the key thing here is they're not shortcuts. They're not shortcuts. Again, the difference between the lyre, the musical instrument, not a lyre. I hadn't thought about that. But anyway, but the difference between a lyre and a shovel. A shovel gives us a shortcut, right? I don't want to have to dig this row for vegetables for planting by hand. I need a shortcut for doing that. So I have a shovel that allows me to do so. But a lyre actually allows me to create, to actually produce something even more. So these tools that are being created, this technology being created, is not going to be a shortcut, folks. They are extensions, they are not replacements. They are extensions of humanity, they are not replacing our humanity. All right. So, here's the sticking point. Some people get this joke. Most of you don't. I don't know what that says about most of you. Do y'all know you can play cards on a computer? Are y'all homeschooled so much you don't know you can play cards on a home? Right? Okay. So what does it have to do with computers? I'm going to jump ahead a few thousand years. In order for computers to come into existence, just like every other revolutionary technology, there has to be certain things invented. There has to be certain things created. Now, friends, one of the things you got to understand about technological revolution, and I do mean revolution in the modern sense of the word, actually producing things that are fundamentally new, is that seldom are these things intentionally created from scratch. Across all the course of human history, when we have a technological revolution, it always occurs because people begin borrowing inventions created to do other things. And as they borrow those inventions created to do other things, they bring them together to do something new. And I'll give a very easy example of this. I went to college in the United Kingdom. To be specific, I went to college for a while in South Wales. Wales is not known for very much. People there speak a form of English that you can hardly understand. I lived in a little town called Swansea, which was next door to the town where the actress Catherine Zeta-Jones was from. So, and I kid my wife sometimes that had I known she was there, I probably wouldn't have left. But anyway, that's another story. Ha, 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 you can laugh at it. It's okay. But something happened in South Wales a couple of centuries ago, and it was this invention of this thing. Y'all may have heard of it before, a railroad. Have y'all heard of railroads? Right? The first railroad is there. The first train engine is there. And what occurred is that in the Welsh coal mines, which were very dangerous places, new things were being created to deal with different processes in the mining of coal. One thing was that the mines were always flooding, and they needed to come up with a way of pumping the water out of the mines so people could come in there and actually do the digging. Well, it just so happened that people realized they could create a machine powered by steam that would manipulate the water and pump the water out of the mine. At the same time, others in the coal mining industry were looking for ways to get the coal out of the mine in a more speedy fashion. They're looking for a shortcut. They're looking for a tool. And they realized if they put carts on metal bars and metal rails, they could take an animal and pull large amounts of coal out of those mines. Well, somebody realized, oh my, I can put people in those carts. Probably somebody was just hitching a ride one day. Yeah. And I can not only do that, I can also power those carts using steam, hence the first railroad and train. So see what's happened? You're taking inventions useful in other tasks, and you're bringing it together in a new and important and unknown way. That's what happens with technology. Now, for computers, certain things have to come together. First thing that's got to come together is we've got to have some sort of language. We've got to have the ability of structuring a way of programming machines. There has to be a language that we can plug into a machine so that it knows what to do. Remember those counting instruments? I said they give you step-by-step instructions. Y'all remember that? Have y'all already lost that? Everybody with me all right? Step-by-step instructions. You've got to have a way of giving that language of instruction. Another thing you've got to be able to do is create a way in which those things can be stored. And third, we've got to have a way of basically taking math and turning math into a new kind of language that allows us to manipulate the storage of memory and to manipulate the instructions. In other words, those step-by-step instructions, machines can't understand the English language. Machines can't understand force. How many of you have watched your parents hit a machine, right? Why won't it work? Bang, right? Why can't I get this computer to work? Whop, right? I'm sorry to tell you, but your parents don't know that it doesn't work, right? It can't understand human language. We got to have a way in which we render human language into a language that machines can understand with regularity. And another thing that has to happen is we got to have hardware. We've got to actually have the machines to make all of this stuff work. So let me take just a few moments, and I'm intentionally reducing this part of the presentation because it gets to be kind of complex, and I think you're going to have these slides. You can read through them, or you can talk to me afterward. I'll be happy to give you more to the story. But let me give you 4 people who are helpful and responsible for this. Again, 4 people working in 4 very different fields that are going to be coming together to produce this revolutionary technology. The first is Joseph Marie Jacquard. He was a weaver. He was looking for a way of automatically weaving fabric. Now, for those of you who are accustomed to weaving or crochet or stitch point, I don't know all that kind of stuff. I don't do a lot of that. You understand this better than most of the rest of us. In order to weave fabric, you have to actually make the threads overlap in some areas and underlap in others. Has to go over and under. Have I got that right? Right? Yeah, okay, see, y'all are admitting it. Okay. So we've got to have a way of making the thread go under and go over. What Jacquard managed to do that is so important is that he realized he could take a loom, weaving the fabric, and he could get the loom to change the overlay and underlay by using a series of punch cards. And I don't know if you can see this in the back, but these are cards. And these little black things in the cards are punch holes. And so he hooked up these things in a special way to the loom, and as the loom worked, it would basically understand that a hole meant it went under, and when there's not a hole, the thread goes over. Now, I might have got that a little bit backwards, but that's the basic concept, that this loom is going to weave based on these punch cards, right, on a hole. Right? When it's open, it does one thing. When it's closed, it does another. He's creating binary logic, which allows him to do something very interesting with this tool, with a tool that makes it a genuine piece of logic. All right, he's programming it. On the other side of the English Channel, a Britishman by the name of Charles Babbage is thinking through the ramifications of what Jacquard has invented. And he's thinking of ways in which it can be changed into other types of machines. And Babbage is going to envision what he called the analytical engine. Now, this was never built by Babbage himself. People came along later on and tried to build it, but it was an imagination. It was kind of a blueprint. And basically, what he said is that we can take these punch cards, this punch card idea, open, close, and we can manipulate a machine such that I can take those cards and I can store memory on the cards. I can actually punch holes in certain areas. I can hold on to the cards. I can keep the cards, and I can make that machine do another kind of task using that same card at a later date. So he's really creating a kind of storage from this. It is steam-powered. But again, it is the first effort to envision a programmable logic and language. Now, the interesting thing about, in effect, what Babbage is doing to speak language that y'all can probably understand, maybe not this guy, right? Okay. But for those of you who are younger, what Babbage is really doing here is he's creating an algorithm. So this is the first algorithm, is in his analytical engine. this guy's probably a computer scientist, and so I'm picking on him. I have no idea who this guy is, so he's a good sport, though, I know that. Now, Babbage was a curmudgeonly kind of guy. Nobody liked Charles Babbage. He was mean. He was fretful. He was delicate. And he depended heavily on the British government to give him money to conduct all of this kind of research. Finally, members of the British Parliament had enough of this guy. They were sick of seeing him. They had no more money, Chuck. You got to go find somebody else to help you. So he's roaming around looking for someone to fund him. And he goes to Italy, and he presents a paper to Italians trying to gain investment. And it doesn't really go anywhere, doesn't really get the investment he wants. But there is an Italian present in the audience, not unlike this one. And that Italian person writes up the lecture in French. Right? Just what Italians might do. Decides to write it up in French. Well, Ada Lovelace, daughter of Lord Byron, one of the leading romantic authors of the 19th century, she had been raised to be highly educated. She loved French, she loved Italian, she loved English, she loved science. And so Ada Lovelace got a hold of this Italian guy's French translation of what Babbage said. Y'all lost yet? Gets better. And she decides for fun, she's going to translate it into English. And she goes back and forth with Babbage. Am I translating this right? Is this what you really meant? Is that what you really meant? They're just going back and forth, like email. They're going back and forth, till she gets it right. And what Lovelace realizes in pondering Babbage's analytical engine is that she begins to realize that this analytical engine might operate on something besides just the punches. On, off, open, close, numbers, 1, 0. That it might operate not on numbers, but Lovelace postulates maybe it will operate on symbols. And if we can create symbols that mean different things at different times, then whatever machine I am creating may be able to do some really amazing things. Lovelace says, what if we can program a machine that reads musical notes? If it can read musical notes, maybe it can produce music. And it's not just music, but that was part of it. All right, now, like Babbage, Lovelace was very critical. She saw limits in this. It can only do so much, and we have to be really careful with it. But she is talking about symbols. Now, so we've got these inventions, we've got the machines, we've got the idea of having symbols and machines reading that. We have a sense of what can be done. What we need is actual code. We need the language. So give me just 2 minutes and I'll wrap up here. And that brings us to George Boole, B-O-O-L-E, George Boole. Boole was a kind of child prodigy. He was mainly self-taught. His family was not very wealthy. He loved mathematics, but what George Boole really had a passion for was Aristotelian logic. He loved Aristotle. He loved being able to think logically and work through logical prompts and syllogisms. Anybody, y'all heard the word syllogism before? Okay, quite a few of you. How many of you have been raised with a classical school curriculum? I am curious. About the same ones who know syllogism. Okay. So he has a passion for this. He loves math. He loves Aristotle. And we ask a simple question. What if I take Aristotelian logic and I translate that into the algebraic language? What if I turn Aristotle into math? absolutely fundamental question that has fundamentally changed your life and mine. We're going to turn it into math. So, turns logic into a symbolic language. What did Lovelace say? Maybe it's not just going to read numbers. Maybe we can program it with symbols. So, and his argument was basically Aristotelian logic is based on a true-false structure or an if-then structure. This, if A is true and B is true, then C ought to be true. If A is true and B is false, then C is false. Let me put it to you this way. I'll give you a kind of a complex way of understanding our buddy Aristotle. You don't have to read any of this, but this is just a graphical analysis of the narrative of Aristotelian logic. Lots of words, right? See a lot of words up there? Y'all see a lot of words up there, right? Well, what Boole is going to do is he's going to take all of these words, all of these syllogisms, and he's going to turn them into algebra. And he's going to turn them into symbols, right? That or that, right? It's like going to the eye doctor. 1 or 2. Which is easier to understand, right? Now, you may not like algebra, you may not like math, but ladies and gentlemen, surely you can see this, right? He has simplified it. Yeah, he has. He really has, right? Okay, well. Luckily for you, the clicker died. A couple of other things before we finish up. So he's taking these symbols and he's writing them out as formulas. He's writing logic out as formulas. And if you'll look there at that top, oh, there it is. Notice this. I want you to remember this pattern here. I'm not asking you to do this or anything like that. Just remember that pattern just for a moment, please. So, what have we done? We've got a programmable language. We have a kind of coding structure. We know we can program these machines. We know we can store things and have memory. And we now have with Boole a way of reducing complex logic to symbols. We have taken the numbers, the step-by-step instructions, we've reduced them to symbols that a machine needs to be able to understand. But what's still missing is the hardware. By the end of the 19th century, human beings had created sophisticated communications hardware. They're called telephones. Have any of you ever heard of a telephone? Have any of you ever used a telephone? And if you're raising your hand because you think your smartphone is a telephone, you're expelled. No. That is not the same. A telephone is a telephone. A smartphone is a smartphone. So, enter this guy, Claude Shannon, the father of information theory. Claude Shannon was working with early telephone relays and telephone hardware and telephone switches. And you've probably seen films or movies or pictures of the old telephone operators who'd have to take a wire and plug it into different switches and different things. He worked with that. And what he was trying to deal with is there was a lot of noise, a lot of background noise in that system. And Boole realized, I got to come up with a way of filtering out all of this noise. And he wrote it out on paper. All right, I got noise, I've got these problems, I got to deal with the noise. How am I going to do that? Shannon looks at this and he remembers Boolean algebra. I can reduce this down to a Boolean mathematical equation. And if I can reduce it to a Boolean mathematical equation, I can make prediction, I can make changes, I can have certainty, and I can ensure I can get rid of that noise, which is exactly what he did. So he creates the hardware. And he realizes I can lay out these switches, I can lay out these relays, and I can lay them out like mathematical formula and use that to give language to a machine. And I think with that, I am going to conclude by helping you understand something fundamental here. I don't know how many times I've used the word fundamental or important. Maybe I need clippies for each time. What all of these people are doing over the course of the 19th and early 20th century that had never been done before in the thousands of years of human history, they are reversing the power of technology. Where technology was taking figments of the imagination and giving them physical functionality. What they are doing, culminating with Claude Shannon, they are taking physical reality, like all those relays and circuits, and they're laying it out in certain patterns and turning it back into a figment of our imagination. And when they do that, it allows us to begin thinking out theoretically how we can program machines to dramatically expand what human beings previously thought possible. I'll talk to you later this morning.